Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming, thank you to Selsdon for organising it, and thank you Matthew and the Taxpayers Alliance for the sterling work you do to highlight the waste, the incompetence, the grotesque mismanagement which has characterised the public accounts for at least the last 11 years. Our Labour critics tell us that we want to do the impossible. They say that the Conservatives want to cut taxes, cut borrowing, and have better public services. I see nothing impossible about doing those three. Indeed, you would have to be monumentally incompetent to manage to put up taxes, put up borrowing, and worsen public services all at the same time. But that, of course, is what we've been experiencing in recent years. The advantage we will have when coming to power is that things are just so badly run that a little bit of management discipline, a little bit of fiscal rectitude, the odd flirtation with prudence would start to make a lot of difference. What did poor old Prudence do? Gordon Brown comes to office wedded to prudence. He inherits very strong accounts. He inherits a growing economy. He decides to demolish the pension funds in year one, and he decides to sell all our gold to buy euros at the wrong price. But apart from that, the first 3 years he didn't do badly because he stuck with prudence. Lovely girl. We did all right. He was paying back debt, he was increasing public spending on public services, and he didn't put taxes up very much. If he'd done it slightly better, he could have done the three-card trick. You could have had lower tax rates, you could have had more tax revenue from growth, you could have had better public services with better management, and you could have cut borrowing. That is what we're going to have to do. But what a mess, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take over. When I wrote the Economic Policy Review, the government was telling us then that we had just borrowed 530 billion as a country. I said to myself, if the Chancellor of the Exchequer were an honest man and a company director living under company accounting rules for Britain, what would he actually have to put on our balance sheet? And I concluded that if he put in the PFIs and the PPPs and the off-balance sheet items and the unfunded pensions and all the other things that a company would have to put on, the answer was 1.3 trillion, not 530 billion. And I mentioned this in the House of Commons in front of Treasury Ministers. Not one leapt to their feet to say that I'd got it wrong. So I knew I had got it wrong. I'd obviously understated it later. I recast the figures very recently, after Northern Rock. But gosh, is it Tuesday? And there's been another 50 billion added since then. I recast the figures recently at 1.5 trillion. More than our national income in debt and unfunded liabilities. Again, when we still had a Parliament meeting, and it's very rare these days, as you know, they listened to my figure and they didn't quibble with it. So we inherit a massive debt burden, a massive burden of unfunded liabilities. We will also inherit a situation where they are borrowing more and more by the day. They said they were going to borrow just over 40 billion this year. I'm out there with a forecast of a bit over 60 billion. Now all the private forecasters have caught up with me. The private forecasters are now leapfrogging me for next year. I've been a bit cautious because I know what Labour will do if I ever say anything that they think is a bit racy. And you know I never say anything racy, ladies and gentlemen. And the private forecasters are now out there with 80 or 90 billion of extra borrowing next year. Such is the carnage being wrought in the accounts. So I agree with Matthew. We have to manage things better, and we have to identify the waste and the unnecessary spending. And where do you begin, ladies and gentlemen? You can have a list as long as you like, and we don't want to be here all day, so I won't go into too much detail. But let's take regional government. Who wants unelected regional government in England? I don't know. My constituents don't want it. Let's get rid of it. Yeah. And let's not just get rid of RDAs. Let's get rid of the assemblies. Let's get rid of the housing quangos. Let's get rid of the planning quangos. We do not need any kind of regional government in our unitary country called England. Yeah. And we need to have England back because they want Wales and they want Scotland, so we want England, and we do not want it balkanised, and we do not want to be sent the bill for all these people on quangos and interfering busybodies getting in the way of either local government or national government making those decisions government needs to make. And why do we need identity computers and identity cards? That's another easy saving where we just go in and we cancel it. And even if there's a cancellation charge, it will be worth it, because we'll save billions on top, because it won't be finished and it won't be working well, and we'll spare ourselves all the misery of the permanent system, designed, as always with Labour schemes, to damage the honest, the decent, the law-abiding, the tax-paying, but I'm sure it won't catch the criminals, the crooks and the illegal immigrants, because that's a different problem. And haven't they learned that if they can print passports, they can print ID cards? So let's scrap this ridiculous and expensive scheme. I think decent housekeeping begins at home. I speak to you as one of the cheapest MPs to keep. And I know I can still do better. And so when a government department says to me, we are spending every penny and every pound perfectly and you cannot make any cut without cutting frontline services, I say poppycock. As one of the cheapest MPs to keep, I can do it better, and I tend to try and do it better. And the other day I realised that over all the years as a Member of Parliament, I just assumed that MPs always used first-class mail and we were issued with first-class envelopes. They all need to be paid for by the taxpayer. So I did a little sum, because the postal rates have just gone up, and contacted the authorities and said, aren't there any second-class envelopes? Oh yes, if you really ask and you really want them, we can give you second-class envelopes. Fine, easy saving. I don't suppose the post will be any later getting to my constituents, second class than first class. And I'm going to save several £100 of taxpayers' money simply by exercising a bit of common sense that I'm afraid I should have exercised years ago. I hope my colleagues are going to catch up. It is terribly easy saving money and being responsible if you want to and if you want to get on top of it. But too many people in the public sector don't want to get on top of it, and they don't make the easy savings. So we need to cut out the things we don't want at all. We need to do things better where we do want things done properly. We need, in the great public services, to spend enough on good schools and good hospitals. But let's spend it in the schools and in the hospitals, and let's cut out all the middlemen and women and all the guff and all the management consultants and all the regional and area bodies and all the people snooping and prying and all the target setters and standard setters. They're the people who are not helping, they're getting in the way because their Labour government is instructing them to do things that make it more difficult to run a good public service. But today, Chairman, I want to concentrate on the biggest, most damaging, most worrying, most sinister ballooning of the public debt and the public costs which I've ever seen. And that is this latest fashion to nationalise banks. I do not really know where to begin. It is so terrifying what they're doing, it is so worrying what is going on. And I don't want to speak on this subject in a partisan mode. I think there is a case for us saying to the government, this is a very serious problem. We are a responsible opposition. We're not out to make party political points out of what is now happening because it is too serious. And of course, we will back and support any sensible action. But I also believe, as a responsible opposition, it is up to us to come up with some ideas that challenge the prevailing orthodoxy. Because it is very clear that the prevailing orthodoxy has failed. Let's take proposition number 1 from the government. The proposition is that this is a US problem made in America, which primarily has to be solved in America. I asked Mr. Brown this question. Did he notice yesterday that 4 different European banks were in difficulties and needed different kinds of injections and fixes so that they could carry on trading and so they could retain the confidence of their customers and their counterparties? Those were all European banks, lending money primarily to Europeans, regulated by European regulators, encouraged to excess by poor central banking in Europe, just as surely as the American banks had been encouraged to excess by poor central banking in America over the last decade.